Right, I think we are good to get started. So, good morning or good afternoon, sorry, depending on where you are, actually. If you're further east in Europe, I'm sure it's the afternoon for you now. A very warm welcome to what is the second webinar of the Precilience project. Thank you so much for joining us. We're really happy that you're here. My name is Naomi and I work on project communications with my colleagues from OPLA. I'm going to give a brief introduction and some housekeeping, and then we can get started with what's sure to be a very interesting and thought-provoking webinar. For those new here and unfamiliar with Precilience, Precilience is a large 4.5-year research project funded by the European Union's Horizon programme. The project is working on developing collaborative, practical and tested solutions to help the agriculture and forestry sectors adapt to a changing climate in Europe's boreal regions. If you want to learn more about the project, contact us or receive updates, you can head to our website where you can sign up for our newsletter or follow us on LinkedIn, or you can see an email address there on those slides. In today's webinar, we will hear more about the project's work on climate-related change, risks, potential adaptation methods, as well as how climate change is impacting those working directly on and with the land. Presenting to us about these topics today with a range of expertise and perspectives, I'm delighted to introduce our speakers. First, we have Nadia Testani, who is a researcher at the University of Buenos Aires and the Natural Resources Institute in Finland. Nadia's work focuses on climate risks in agriculture, and in Precilience, she is helping to develop a risk framework analysing past climate impacts on forestry and agriculture and looking at building adaptation portfolios. Second, we will hear from Gustav Strandberg, who is a researcher at the Swedish Meteorological and Hydrological Institute. Gustav has a PhD in atmospheric science, and his research interests cover interactions between the land and the atmosphere, both past and future, and how to make climate information useful to different groups in society. Next, we will hear from Karoliina Rimhanen, also from Natural Resources Institute in Finland. Karoliina has a PhD in agroecology and specialises in climate change, resilience and adaptation in agriculture. Her expertise extends to participatory methods, including narratives and storytelling, and we'll hear more about this today. And finally, we will hear from Olli-Pekka Ruponen, who is an agrologist, farmer and advisor working in Finland. Olli-Pekka specialises in autumn sown plants and the crop rotation diversification that they bring. He also provides support and expertise to others on arable crop operations and digital and precision agriculture. And we are going to hear today from Olli-Pekka about ways that climate change is impacting farmers directly. So we're in very good company. We will put questions to speakers at the end. So if you do have questions, please put them in the chat and we will put as many of these to the speakers at the end. Please, when you do put your question in the chat, if you could specify who the question is for and introduce yourself if you feel comfortable. The only other practicality is today's webinar is going to be presented in English, but it is being recorded and we will add subtitles in the region's languages subsequently, so you can share it widely or you can watch it back if you should you choose to. And with that, I will stop talking and hand over to Nadia. Nadia.
Yes. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for being here. Today I'm gonna present how we are thinking this climate risk and opportunities for Nordic agriculture and forestry within this project. Can you go next? So when we think about climate risks, there are a million things that can come to our mind. For example, water stress, pests and diseases, yield losses with economic consequences, changes in the growing season length, and so on and so forth. Can you go next? And there is no single definition of climate risk. It's a really complex concept, and there are multiple ways to approach it. And when we decide how to approach it, we are also deciding whose voices are included and what knowledge will be used to set the basis to respond to climate change. So one possible definition, and not the only one, is the one of the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change that in the last report defined climate risk as the potential for adverse consequences for human or ecological systems, recognizing the diversity of values and objectives associated with these systems. And this same report defines the climate risk in the context of the impacts of climate as the interaction of three things. The first one is the climate hazard, that are like all the climate-related events and changes that can lead to one possible impact into one system. For example, a spring drought. But if a spring drought happens in the middle of the ocean, at least no human system could be influenced by it. So we also need the exposure. So we need a system, a human system, economic system, ecosystem to be in the place where that climate hazard is happening. So in this case, it could be if there are crops in the region where that spring drought is happening. But then if that happens in a place where, for example, we have the capacity to irrigate, then we would be less vulnerable to that climate hazard. Or we can even don't even feel that impact. So we also need to have this risk, some component of vulnerability. So for example, are those crops that are in that region that is experiencing spring drought vulnerable to water stress, and are the farmers there not capable of having irrigation systems? Then if all those three things happened at the same time, we will experience, for example, yield losses related to this climate hazard. So, and that's what we will define as an indicator of a climate risk. That is what you will see in your farm or in your local experience. But in Precilience, we don't want to focus only on the risks, but we also want to focus on the opportunities. So we adapted this framework also using the basis of the IPCC. And instead of thinking of a climate hazard, now we can think of a positive climate impact driver. So something that will change or that is changing in the climate that can be used as an opportunity. So for example, the growing season gets longer. Again, we will need a system that is exposed to that impact driver. So for example, if there are crops in the region where that growing season is getting longer. But then if we don't have any capacity to get some advantages of this growing season, then it wouldn't mean an opportunity. So we also need to have a capacity to benefit. So for example, access to crop species and cultivars that can benefit from that longer growing season. And then if all these three things happens, then we can, for example, see that the yield is increasing due to this longer growing season. And that could be an indicator of this opportunity. Can you go next? So these are like the two things that we are considering, both risk and opportunities. Then Gustav will show you like some results of these climate hazard and climate impact drivers. And then Carolina will talk about this vulnerability and capacity to benefit with another kind of approach. Can you go next? But I want to really emphasize that when we set this kind of framework, there are some local specificities and some relations and dynamics that we are, of course, missing, especially in the local scale. And we are in this project including some methodologies to get this local context. For example, interviews, surveys, and narratives that Carolina will show next. And then, for example, we will have like co-production of knowledge workshops. And we are in this dialogue with the stakeholders during the whole project. And for example, this seminar is part of it. So yeah, nothing else. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Nadia. We will hand over to Gustav.
Thank you. And yes, as said, I am a climate researcher working at the Swedish Weather Service, and I will give you kind of a basic background on what we see in climate change. So just as a teaser, perhaps, and then we will see. We will dig into this more in the coming webinars and workshops. So climate change is not only something that will happen in the future, it is also something that is happening right now. So within climatology, we work with these 30-year periods because if you just look at single years, you may select something that is unusually warm or dry or cold or wet or something like this. So we work with this 30-year periods as a description of what climate is like. And the last such period is the period 1991 to 2020. I see now that there is a typo here in this picture. And if we compare that to the period before 1961 to 1990, then we have a picture of how climate is changing right now or has changed. And just by looking at these two figures, you see that the colors are shifting to the north. And these blue colors that are regions where we have annual temperatures below zero, they are shrinking quite a lot actually. And if we just subtract them from each other, we see that within these 30-year periods, so in average, this is a change in 30 years. Temperature has increased with roughly 1 degree in this region. And at the same time, the global temperature has increased with about 0.5 degree. So the warming trend is stronger in our region. And then the question is, what happens in the future now? And future climate change depends on future emissions of greenhouse gases. There is no physical laws that we can use to calculate what those emissions will be, because it depends on us and our society. So to say something about future climate, we just have to make some assumptions about how large the emissions of greenhouse gases can be. And this scenario discussion can be quite complicated. So to make it a little bit simpler today, we just say that right now the warming rate is about 0.2 degrees per decade. And if we now just make the hypothetical example of just expanding this in the future, this would mean that we will reach 1.5 degrees. And this is now global annual average compared to pre-industrial conditions. So this should be compared then to the Paris Agreement of 1.5 and 2 degrees. So we will reach 1.5 degrees at around 2040 and 2 degrees at around 2070, something like this. This is, I mean, an approximation. But then again, we don't know exactly what the trend will be in the future. So this trend could be steeper, it could be flatter. It depends on how large the emissions are and how well we reach our goals of reducing emissions. But one point here is that we are sure that we will have additional climate change. That is absolutely certain. And it's likely that we will reach 1.5 degrees from pre-industrial conditions within this century. And it's likely that we will also reach 2 degrees. And what does that then mean for the climate in the precilience region? So now I just selected one of these scenarios as an example. And now we compare the end of last century, so 1971 to 2000, to the end of this century, 2071 to 2100. So this is comparable to what we saw before. And here I also drew a couple of lines just to mark where we have zero annual temperature and 5 degrees. And then you can see that they shift quite far north to the end of the century. And depending on where you are, this increase in temperature is somewhere between 2.5 and 3.5 degrees. So that's quite a lot, actually. And another quite logical consequence of a warming climate is that we will have more warm days, of course, but also fewer cold days. And here we see the number of frost days. And frost days are days where the minimum temperature is below 0. So this is not super cold or anything, but still it's cold. And again, we see that these days, they decrease quite a lot with time. And another example of this is the longer vegetation period. So in a warmer climate, the vegetation period will be longer just because we reach this threshold earlier. And in the precilience region, this means 20 to 50 days longer. So one month, a little bit less more. Depending on where you are. And here I just, again, if you go back again, just drew these lines to show how all of this is shifted. Because sometimes it could be a little bit difficult to realize what is 1 degree or 2 degrees warmer climate. But that could actually mean that conditions that we now see in southern Sweden will be what we see in central Finland in the future, for example. And that gives you some kind of perspective of what this actually means. Yes, and then to sum this up, so climate is already changing. This is not something that we say will happen in the future only. And more or less everything that we say about future climate is only an extension of things that we already observe. So it's not that we make up something strange things that will happen in the future, but we are along this path already. And we can be sure that climate will continue to change. So as long as there are emissions of greenhouse gases, we will have more climate change. So the only question is how big will that change be and how fast will it go? And that's an example then. So it is likely that temperature will increase with 2 to 3 degrees within this century. And in a warmer climate, we will have, and it's kind of logical, but more warm days, fewer cold days, longer vegetation period, which all of this means a general shift of the climate zones or the agricultural zones for that matter, because they are quite, they follow the temperature lines, you could say, which all implies then changing phenology and changing farming practices, changing distribution on plants, but not only plants, but also different kinds of pests and pathogens, for example. Yeah, so that's it for me. Thank you all, and I will now hand over to Carolina.
Thank you, Gustav. Carolina, over to you.
Thank you, and good morning and afternoon to all. So in my presentation, I will take you a few steps towards practice and to a bit different kind of approach. I will tell you about our participatory work that serves as a bridge between scientific knowledge and practices. It aims to make an uncertain and complex future a bit more concrete using stories. So the title of my presentation is Bringing the Future into Focus: Climate Change Through Stories. Next one, please. And as we have heard from the previous presentations of Gustav and Nadia, climate change is already changing agriculture and forestry in Northern Europe. Rising temperatures, shifting precipitation, and increasing extreme events, they all demand urgent responses. And these responses are not just technical ones, but also social, cultural, and communicative. Yet even we have a growing awareness of climate change, taking action still remains very difficult. And why is that? It's because climate change is not only a scientific issue, but it's also an emotional, political, and psychological one. The overload of information and also the complexity of trade-offs and the uncertainty of future conditions can often paralyze rather than mobilize actions. Next one. Redeciding our systems in agriculture and forestry is very challenging task. There is no one-size-fits-all solution. It involves navigating in economic and ecological and social priorities all at the same time. The best solutions are never universal, but they are deeply local. The practices must fit in real-life realities to be accepted and credible. Next one. One of the barriers to action is the way we communicate about climate change. Stakeholders, like farmers, foresters, policymakers, and citizens, they all come with very different expectations, different values, and different languages. So when an expert tells that, for example, projected precipitation changes show high variability, a farmer may think that, okay, nice to know, but what should I plant next year? A forester may wonder, does this mean that the fire risk will go up? And a policymaker may ask whether this is an urgent or long-term impact. So people need meaning and not just data. And the traditional science communication doesn't always speak to their realities. But stories can. Stories can help us make sense of complexity They can bridge facts and feelings, different kind of knowledge, different experiences, and also wishes for the future. Stories can allow people to process very abstract concepts like risks and uncertainty by placing them into human contexts. In climate work, these kind of stories have been used as so-called boundary objects that can help different actors start meaningful conversations. Next one. In our Precilience project, we are applying the story approach for the project regions we have in Finland, Estonia, Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. The stories are based on interview data with the local stakeholders from the regions. They focus both in agriculture and forestry sectors, and they summarize the projected impacts of climate change, and they reflect local concerns and values, and explore viable adaptation paths. They are not just summaries, but more like conversations, which are grounded in both science and in local realities. They don't replace the science, but more like translate it. Each region has its own challenge. It can be drought in southern Sweden or new pests in Finland. Inspiration for this kind of work we have gotten from a Finscapes project that was conducted in Finland and ended last year. Next one. So as we are facing the complex climate risks, let's not only focus on what needs to be changed, but also how we talk about it. Facts tell and stories can move, and change can begin with a shared story. I will now tell you Arne's story. He's a farmer and a forester living in the southern Finland. Spring used to come the way it was supposed to. Now it arrives a little differently. Not worse, just differently. I have farmed this land and these woods for over 40 years. I have seen rains, frosts, good years, bad ones. But in recent years, the rhythm has changed. The soil doesn't dry when it should. Sometimes it rains, the rain pours like from a bucket, and then weeks go by with nothing. Winters are warmer. Insects we never used to worry about are staying through the year. Some trees struggle with the heat, and storms take down more than they used to. It's harder to plan your work, harder to know when and how to protect what grows. But I'm not giving up. Quite the opposite. I have learned you can't do this job by the calendar anymore. You have to listen more carefully to the land, the weather, and the forest too. I have tried new crop varieties, built a system to collect rainwater, and with the forest, I've started mixing more species, thinking further ahead. That was a big shift, but now, seeing how it helps, it feels right. And the more I follow research and talk with the younger generation, the more I believe there is still a lot that is possible. My daughter is coming back to the farm, and that's another reason I want to believe in this, that we are not just leaving behind a load of worries, but also something from which hope can grow. The land never stops teaching, and as long as we are willing to learn, this isn't a lost cause. Thank you very much for listening. That was my presentation, and now we move from stories to reality again, and we will hear a presentation by Olli-Pekka Ruponen, who is a farmer and an advisor, and he talks about his experiences with climate change.
Okay, maybe you hear me. Hello everyone, I'm Olli-Pekka from Finland, southwest part of Finland, and I tell you something about real life farming. This is my first slide: farmers' experience of climate change, instability, new challenges, and practical solutions. I must use some notes because that's in English. But now you can change the slide. For farmers, climate change is not just about rising maximum temperatures. In everyday farming life, it shows up a new type of weather conditions, loss of control, and both economic and agronomic uncertain. The aim of this presentation is to highlight how farmers perceive changes, how they are adapting, and how research can truly support us. Back one, sorry. I said that. Went to three one. Farmers' perspectives vary. Some farmers do not acknowledge that the climate has changed. I think reasons may include natural variation between extreme years, lack of trust in institutions, feelings of being blamed, personal beliefs or principles, and I think also self-deception. And some have already been responding to changing conditions, sometimes unknowingly, or even while denying climate change. They have still already have been responding to changing conditions. Many feel that something has changed even if they don't call it climate change. I think this is very typical situation. It's often hard to find factual location-specific data on these changes. And now next slide, please. Climate becomes unpredictable. The terminal growing season has become longer, but unevenly. Year-to-year variation is greater than before. For example, like Carolina said, already said, a long spring followed by an unexpected cold spell. Droughts interrupted by heavy rains at planting time, as this year here in southern part of Finland. Mild winters followed by surprise frost in April. And for farmers, this means a loss predictability, letting go of fixed calendars, same thing as Carolina says, that calendar things. This one must be based on real-time weather and intuition. Next slide, please. Here is my own real example. One example, because we have only 7 minutes. I take one example. On my own farm in southwest Finland, a new phenomenon has become clear. In 2023, night frost continued 14th June, very late. Last year it's 12th of May, and this year is 13th of May. And I think this is not a continuation of old pattern, it is a new risk factor, likely related to climate change, maybe. I think so. It especially affects winter cereals, winter oilseed rape, like you see in my picture. There is frost damage. This is about 1 week ago. Also, it affects on, of course, early potatoes, early spring cereals, open field vegetables, and berries. Official weather stations don't always tell the whole story. Ground level temperatures can fall much below freezing, even when official sensors don't register it. There are very few official ground temperature measurements stations in Finland. Farmers' own observation and networks and local knowledge are essential. And next slide. Adapting to changing conditions, practical solution from farmers. Diversification and crop rotation help reduce risk. Precision farming, personal measurements, and local knowledge improve agility. Peer networks and sharing experience are more important than ever. And how research can support farmers. We need research and communication based on building trust, not delivering on top-down routes. And most important is all focus on improving farm profitability. Local level weather data and forecast. My example was that ground temperature thing. Research in the new phenomenon such as spring frost. Clear, easy to understand, and information and practical tools. And as you see, last slide, we like to code development research should be part of farmers' everyday life, not above it. I think that last slide picture was only AI picture whole day. That's not real people. Last slide, you can see my all if you want to put email or call for me. That's and also as social media things. Maybe I have 7 minutes go now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Olli-Pekka. That was really fascinating. And I'm just going to hand over to Carolina to summarize for us, and then there'll be an opportunity to ask questions. So if you're here, if you're listening, do please use the chat function to put some questions to the panelists. Carolina.
Yes, thanks. And yeah, that was quite a surprise that that was not a real photo, Olli-Pekka, but okay, I believe you. Technology is amazing nowadays. So here in the end, we would like to share with you these key takeaways, which is jointly done by all presenters of the webinar. So here we put together a few things we would hope you remember after the webinar. First of all, we'd like to highlight that climate change is already changing conditions for agriculture and forestry in Northern Europe, and the impacts are regionally specific. Adaptation is not one size fits all, but always local conditions, different stakeholders, and the nature around us also shape what is possible and what is effective adaptation. Especially for farmers, climate change brings more instability, new risks, and greater uncertainty, but there might be also some opportunities as well. Some farmers, especially innovators and early adapters, are already adapting to climate change, but it can often feel quite lonely and also risky without adequate support, peer networks, and access to reliable, feasible information. Real-world stories translate climate risks into action, and they can also offer hope for the future. It's important that research work alongside farmers, not just offer top-down solutions, but more the goal should be to support the majority of farmers and help make farming more resilient and also more profitable. Yes, I think maybe, yeah, still that I'd like to tell you that there is more to come. We will organize regional workshops next autumn in October and November in the Precilience project, and we welcome you all to take part in those. And I guess now we can then move to questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you to all our panelists for yes, a very thought-provoking webinar. And as Carolina says, do please be aware that we're doing some workshops. They'll be in each of the countries coming in autumn. The detail about those will be coming out in due course. You can find out more by going to our website, following us on LinkedIn, and signing up for our newsletter. The newsletter is probably the primary information source for those workshops. So yes, do stay afloat of what it is that we're doing. We don't have any questions in the chat just at the moment, so I'm going to just ask a couple of my own, and maybe that will get people's juices flowing. But if you are listening and you want to ask a question, please don't be shy. Please put a question in the chat. Otherwise, of course, you can contact us subsequently. So this question is for Gustav. You spoke about climate warming in the Nordic region, and I'm just wondering why it is that the Nordic regions are warming faster than other regions in Europe.
Yes, there is a few different explanations for that. So one is that land areas warm faster than the oceans. So actually all continents warm faster than the global average. But then in Northern Europe, we have an extra effect from, there are different feedback mechanisms. So one is that when snow and ice retreats because of warmer climate, more of the incoming solar radiation can be absorbed in the ground, heating it more. And also when you lose the ice on the sea and the lakes, to warm the energy in the water is then connected to the atmosphere. So if you think about a cold day, you can have -20 above the ice, but in the water below it, it's only a few degrees, but it's still plus. And if you remove that ice sheet, then suddenly the water and the atmosphere is in contact with each other, and then that heat could reach the atmosphere, warming it, giving it some additional warming. So that's basically it.
Thank you, Gustav. I can see we have some questions in the Q&A actually. So maybe a follow-up question for that, maybe you've already answered this, but 2 to 3 degrees warmer within this century, is that just for the Nordics or is that for the planet also?
Yeah, that's, I think it was for the Nordics now. I don't remember now. And it's a bit difficult because it also depends on what time periods you compare. So if you think about the Paris Agreement, where we say that we should limit it to maximum of 2 degrees, then we're already more than halfway through. So if you have that long time perspective, we have already a warming of 1 degree globally, which is translated to about the double in our region.
Thank you, Gustav. A question for Carolina now. You were talking about interviewing stakeholders and bringing those stories in so that you can tell them. Could you tell us a bit more about how narrative approaches can support scientific knowledge and decision making?
Well, yes, I think one of the main issue with these narratives and story-based approaches is that they can help translate very, very complex and very abstract climate information into more concrete and also locally relevant scenarios. Often scientific reports may present the data in a format that it is not very accessible for the actors who are not specialists in that field. So they can bring the concrecy and of course also stories can engage people emotionally and help people to see themselves in the future and also bring hope for the future.
Thank you, Carolina. There's been a question for us from Elana Bada. Thank you, Elana, for your question. I've put it in the chat because it's quite a long one, and I'm not sure if we can answer this one about the trees, but I will read out the latter part of the question, and maybe we can either come back to it or someone can take the question for us. So, is there any research that is considering rising winter temperatures, cold stratification, and dormancy with regards to forests? It says continuous consecutive weather stress events can push trees to produce more seed than normal. And do you know of any research that is considering this, perhaps also for wider plant communities and agriculture where relevant? Do we have anyone who might want to take that question for us?
I can say something.
Thank you.
Nadia, please feel free to add on this later on. But I mean, for me, these are exactly these more advanced indicators that we are looking for in precilience, and where I, as a climate researcher, need a counterpart that can explain to me that I'm not only interested in average temperature, because in my forest I have these and these problems, for example, and what kind of indicators can we use to describe this problem? So yes, I mean, this would be very interesting, and I could say that I am a little bit exploring at least spring and winter frost, and perhaps winter warm periods also.
Thanks, Gustav. Nadia.
Yes, well, there are like many forest researchers in working in precilience, so I'm not a forester, but I will definitely talk with our colleagues to see if any of them know. And but as Gustav was saying, like this is the kind of interaction that we are aiming for, because we cannot consider these local risks without being in contact with farmers or foresters or local stakeholders. So first of all, thank you very much for this question, and really like it would be great to be in contact with Elana and to keep on working with particular these indicators, but also to just to say that at least in the workshops that we will have in the next autumn, we will definitely work in developing this kind of indicators.
Thank you, Nadia. We had a question from Rose, which Ollie has answered, but I think I've done something with the chat setting, so my apologies for that. So I'm not sure, Rose, if you can see the answer, but Rose's question was if Olli-Pekka saw any new opportunities for farmers in the Nordic regions, and Olli-Pekka has replied that winter oilseed is a good example. I don't know if anyone else has anything to say regarding new opportunities for farmers in the Nordic regions. Perhaps Nadia, you might be able to speak more about that potentially, or anyone else, of course, if there's anything on opportunities. Beyond winter oilseed. Perhaps.
I think that this question was actually for Olli-Pekka. So what do maybe farmers and foresters see as opportunities in the future in the context of climate change? But of course, all of these opportunities come with many challenges also. And that is also something to consider. For example, what Olli-Pekka was saying about these growing seasons getting longer, then of course there are challenges also linked with that. And we are aiming to also work with those complexities within precilience. Yes.
Thank you, Nadia. One, I think, last question for Gustav, which is that the Nordic regions are still relatively cold compared to other parts of Europe. So why is a few degrees of warming, what is the why is a few degrees of warming so devastating for the region when other parts of Europe will be much warmer, and the Nordics are still quite cold?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I mean, basically we're adapted to the climate that we have right now and have had for the last couple of thousand years, more or less. So it's the rate or the speed of the warming that is the large problem. So if it would be slower, then maybe we'll have time to adapt without really knowing it, because then you can. So for example, the farming practices that Olli-Pekka was talking about, then that is something that is just from generation to generation transferred, and you don't really realize maybe that things are changing. But now you don't have to be so old to have a feeling that it was different not so long ago, actually. And especially when it comes to at least some ecosystems, it's very difficult for them to adapt and sometimes impossible to migrate. And then this is a large problem.
Thank you, Gustav. We are very close to time. I don't know if our panelists want to say any more words, in which case I will thank you all again so much for your time and for your incredibly important and timely work on these topics. It is a very, very important project. I'm sure those in our audience can agree. Really working to find some practical solutions and working with those people that it affects the most. So do please, if the topics have touched you today, if your research overlaps, if you just want to know more about what it is that we're doing, do please follow us on the socials. You can go on precilience.eu is the website. hello@precilience.eu is our email address, and otherwise you can find us on LinkedIn. Sign up for our newsletter where information will come out about other webinars and the workshops that we mentioned in autumn. And otherwise, thank you to all our guests for joining us today. It's been really nice to have you, and we hope to see you again in the future. Have a lovely Tuesday.